They always say you can't run from your problems, but no one tells you what to do when your problems follow you into the walls of an abandoned hospital. I thought it was just a cheap place to crash, a roof over my head while I figured things out. But now, every creak of the floorboards feels like a warning. I can't leave. Not now. Not after what I've seen. The hospital is called St. Augustine's. It was shut down decades ago, condemned after a string of malpractice suits and a few too many mysterious deaths. Everyone in town told me to stay away. It's not safe, they'd say, their voices dropping to a hush like they were afraid the building might hear them. But desperation doesn't listen to warnings. I found the place through an ad in a dingy cafe. Caretaker wanted minimal duties, free housing. It didn't ask for qualifications, just someone who wouldn't mind living alone in a remote and historic location. It sounded perfect. A few weeks to myself, some peace and quiet, and the chance to save some money. When I arrived, it looked exactly like you'd expect, a hulking, gray structure with boarded-up windows and ivy creeping up its crumbling walls. The front doors were still intact, though, the massive, double-arched kind that made you feel small just standing in front of them. "Welcome to the last place you'll ever need," I muttered under my breath, shouldering my bag and stepping inside. The air hit me first, stale, cold, and thick with a faint, metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. The main lobby was cavernous, with a cracked mosaic floor and peeling paint that revealed layers of faded green and yellow. An old reception desk stood in the center, its surface warped from years of neglect. I was supposed to meet someone, a groundskeeper, maybe, but no one was there. Just a set of keys left on the desk, along with a note in scrawled handwriting. "The lights work. Don't go below the first floor after dark." I laughed when I read it. A little melodramatic, sure, but I figured it was some kind of local superstition. The basement was probably unsafe, filled with asbestos or mold. Whatever. I wasn't planning to go exploring. At least, not at first. The first night was uneventful. I set up camp in one of the old staff lounges on the first floor, a room with faded posters still stuck to the walls and a couch that smelled faintly of mildew. I kept the lights on, though they flickered occasionally, and tried not to think too hard about the noises outside, scraping, groaning, and the occasional distant clink that echoed through the halls. By the third night, the noises weren't outside anymore. It started with footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and unmistakable. At first, I thought it was just the building settling. Then I heard the rhythm. Step. 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 Like someone pacing just beyond the door. I held my breath and stared at the thin strip of light beneath the doorframe. No shadows moved. No one knocked. But the footsteps continued, circling the room now, moving to places where no floor existed. And then, from somewhere above me, a voice. "Help me!" It was faint, almost a whisper, but it was there. I wanted to leave, right then and there, but something rooted me to the spot. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was something else. I don't know. All I know is that when I finally forced myself to open the door, the hallway was empty. But the smell of copper was stronger. I stepped into the hallway, clutching my flashlight like a weapon. The air was heavier out here, thick enough that every breath felt like I was inhaling water. My shoes scuffed against the warped linoleum as I turned in slow circles, shining the beam of light into every corner. "Hello?" My voice came out hoarse, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "Is someone there?" Silence answered me. The smell of copper, the unmistakable tang of blood, grew stronger the farther I moved down the corridor. It clung to the walls, seeped into the air. My flashlight's beam caught the faded lettering on the peeling wallpaper. ICU unit, restricted access. I hesitated. The ICU had been barricaded off when I first arrived, a pair of rusted chains draped across the double doors with a padlock the size of my fist. But now the chains were gone, the doors slightly ajar, as if someone, or something, had been waiting for me. I swallowed hard and pressed forward, the hinges groaning in protest as I nudged one of the doors open. The flashlight's beam swept over the room, a long, narrow ward lined with rows of decaying hospital beds. Most were empty, their mattresses sagging under years of rot. But one bed near the center was occupied. I froze, my grip on the flashlight tightening until my knuckles turned white. A figure lay there, unmoving. The blankets were pulled up to its chin, but its face, oh God, its face. Gray and sunken, with hollow eye sockets and a mouth slightly agape, as though frozen mid-scream. The skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, cracked and peeling like old parchment. I took a step back, my stomach lurching, and that's when the figure moved. Its head snapped toward me with a sickening crack, empty sockets locking onto mine. The mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, until the jaw unhinged completely. "Help me!" The voice came from everywhere at once, above, below, inside my own skull. I stumbled back, tripping over a bed frame and landing hard on the floor. The flashlight slipped from my hand, spinning wildly until its beam landed on the far wall. And that's when I saw it. The writing. Hundreds, no, thousands, of words scratched into the paint, gouged so deep into the plaster that they seemed to bleed. Over and over, the same phrase repeated. "It lives below." The copper smell was overwhelming now, so thick I gagged as I scrambled to my feet and bolted back toward the door. But the door wasn't there anymore. The hallways stretched out endlessly in both directions, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering like dying fireflies. My breathing came in short, panicked bursts as I turned in frantic circles, searching for any sign of escape. And then the lights went out completely. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then came the footsteps again. Closer this time. Slower. Deliberate. I fumbled for my flashlight, my fingers trembling so badly I almost dropped it again. When I finally clicked it on, the beam landed on a shape at the end of the hall, a tall, twisted silhouette that seemed to shiver and writhe like smoke. It took a step toward me, its elongated limbs creaking like old wood, and the hallway seemed to shrink with every step it took. The walls closed in, the air pressed against me, and the whispers began to rise. "It lives below. It lives below. It lives below." My legs moved on instinct, carrying me toward the only escape I could see, a narrow staircase leading down. My mind screamed at me to stop, to turn back, but the whispers grew louder with every second I hesitated, and the figure was gaining ground. I didn't have a choice. I took the stairs two at a time, plunging into the suffocating darkness of the hospital's basement. And as I descended, I swear the walls began to breathe. The stairs felt endless, each step dragging me deeper into the suffocating dark. The flashlight's beam trembled ahead of me, its weak light barely cutting through the shadows. The whispers didn't fade as I descended. They grew louder, sharper, overlapping into a chorus of desperate voices. "It lives below. It lives below." The smell of copper thickened until it coated the back of my throat, metallic and bitter. The air grew colder, heavier, and I began to feel it pressing down on me like invisible hands. Finally, my feet hit the bottom step, and I froze. The basement stretched before me like a labyrinth, a network of narrow corridors lined with rusted gurneys and broken equipment. The walls were slick with moisture, and the faintest drip of water echoed somewhere in the distance. But it wasn't water I saw pooling at my feet. The flashlight's beam caught the glint of something dark and viscous, spreading across the cracked tiles in uneven trails. Blood. Fresh, still glistening, and leading deeper into the maze. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to turn back, but my legs moved on their own, drawn forward by some invisible force. The whispers guided me, their overlapping voices becoming clearer, sharper. "This way. Come closer." The trail led to a large metal door, its surface pockmarked with rust and deep scratches. A symbol had been carved into it, an intricate spiral surrounded by jagged lines, like some kind of occult sigil. My hand hesitated on the handle, the cold metal biting into my skin. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to see what was behind it. But the whispers had turned into screams now, shrieking in unison, demanding, "Open it!" I twisted the handle, and the door groaned as it swung inward. The room beyond was vast and cavernous, its ceiling disappearing into darkness. The walls were lined with shelves, each one packed with jars of murky liquid, their contents shifting faintly as though alive. But it was the center of the room that stole my breath. A pit. It stretched wide and deep, its edges lined with jagged stone. From its depths rose a faint red glow, pulsating like a heartbeat. The whispers seemed to pour from it, rising in intensity as I approached. I peered over the edge, and that's when I saw them. Hands. Dozens of them, clawing at the stone walls of the pit, their fingers impossibly long and thin, their skin gray and slick. Eyes stared up from the darkness, glowing faintly like embers, and mouths twisted into grotesque shapes, each one whispering the same word. Closer. A sudden pressure gripped my ankle, yanking me backward. I screamed, spinning around to see a figure behind me, a man, or what used to be one. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, and his mouth was stretched into a grin that didn't belong on any human face. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped, his voice echoing unnaturally in the cavernous space. "It's hungry." I scrambled to my feet, kicking free of his grip, and ran. My flashlight bounced wildly as I darted back through the corridors, the walls seeming to close in around me. The whispers followed, louder than ever, and now there was something else, a guttural growl that shook the very ground beneath me. The stairs were gone. The path I had taken was sealed, the walls shifting like a living thing, trapping me deeper and deeper inside. And then I heard it. A low, rumbling voice, deeper than anything I'd ever heard. It didn't speak in words, but I understood it all the same. "You can't escape." The lights in my flashlight flickered, and for the briefest moment I saw it. A hulking mass, shifting and writhing with limbs that shouldn't exist. Its eyes burned like molten coals, and its mouth split open into a void of jagged teeth. It moved with impossible speed, filling the corridor as it lunged for me. I screamed and turned to run, but I slipped on the blood-slick floor, crashing to my knees. The flashlight skittered away, its beam landing on the symbol carved into the wall. The spiral. Without thinking, I pressed my hand against it, the cold stone searing my skin. The whispers stopped. The growl became a roar. And then, nothing. When I woke up, I was lying in the overgrown grass outside the hospital, the sun just beginning to rise. But the whispers haven't stopped. They're quieter now, a faint hum in the back of my mind. But they're there. And every time I close my eyes I see the pit. And I know it's waiting for me to come back. I tried to tell myself it was a nightmare, a stress-induced hallucination brought on by the claustrophobic isolation of St. Augustine's. But the truth seeped into my bones as surely as the whispers crept into my mind. When I got back to town, no one believed me. "You're lucky you made it out alive," an old woman muttered when I tried to explain what had happened. Her gnarled hands trembled as she handed me a cup of tea. "Most who go into that place don't come out." "But what's in there?" I pressed, desperate for answers. "What lives below?" She wouldn't say. Her lips trembled as she muttered a prayer under her breath, her gaze darting to the window like she expected something to be watching. I left her house with more questions than answers. The whispers didn't help. They came and went, faint murmurs just on the edge of hearing, laced with fragments of sentences I couldn't piece together. "It's not done. You opened the door. It sees you now." I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every shadow stretched too long, every sound echoed too loud. And then the dreams began. Every night, I found myself back in the hospital, standing at the edge of the pit. The hands reached for me, the eyes stared up at me, and the voice rumbled from the depths. "Come back." The first real sign that I'd brought something back with me happened a week later. I was in my apartment, pacing the floor with the TV on for background noise. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent, but I was trying to ignore them, to drown them out with the hum of the city. And then the power went out. The apartment plunged into darkness, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Not real," I whispered to myself. "It's not real." But then I heard it. The growl. Low and guttural, vibrating through the walls. The sound of something vast and hungry moving just beyond sight. I grabbed my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight, but the screen was dead. No power. No escape. The whispers surged. It's here. It's here. I backed against the wall, my eyes darting toward the kitchen. The light from the open fridge flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. Something moved in the shadows. A shape, tall and twisted, its limbs bending in impossible angles. It didn't step into the light. It didn't need to. I could feel it staring at me, its presence pressing against my chest like a physical weight. You can't have me, I whispered, my voice trembling. I'm not coming back. The growl deepened, and the whispers rose into a crescendo. You already belong to it. The next thing I knew, I was outside, standing in the middle of the street with no memory of how I'd gotten there. I knew I couldn't stay. The hospital wasn't just a place. It was alive, and it had marked me. I started researching, combing through old newspapers and library archives for any mention of St. Augustine's. What I found chilled me to my core. The hospital had been built on the site of something much older, something ancient and unholy. The land was cursed, the pit at its center a gateway to something beyond comprehension. Over the years, it had claimed countless victims, patients, staff, even the teams sent to demolish the building after it closed. No one knew how to stop it. But there was one name that kept coming up, Dr. Elias Crowther. He had been the hospital's head surgeon in its final years, a man obsessed with the occult. His journals hinted at rituals performed in the basement, attempts to contain the beast, and seal the gate. The last entry in his journal was chilling. It requires sacrifice. Blood for silence. There is no other way. Now I sit here writing this, because I need someone to know the truth. I can't run anymore. The whispers are louder than ever, and the shadows are always moving, even when there's no light. I can feel it watching me, its hunger pressing against the edges of my mind. I have to go back. Not because I want to, but because I don't think it will let me live if I don't. And maybe, just maybe, I can end this. If you're reading this, and I don't come back, stay away from St. Augustine's. Because once you hear the whispers, they never stop.